First cold wind dragged late dust along the empty road when the stage held at his gate and the door rasped. Fine mist. He had paid her fare in advance and not for himself. The neighbor's name sat in the broker letter, heavy slanted strokes, price, delivery before first real freeze. He had seen that man break a young mare with a buckle for speed. Enough. He rode instead of him, sent the money, hauled 2 sacks of barley to cover the rest, and kept quiet. Now only she and her squarish trunk remained in the coach box. The driver nodded, tapped the receipt, fell silent under the weight of looks. She stepped down slowly, as if the air here was of another weight. Gray dress, seams thinned, throat tie pulled too tight. On the left wrist a narrow heeled shine of burn, a pale bar above sun tone. Hair pulled hard, the damp ends were frayed. She held her hat instead of wearing it. Her fingers shook, not theater, more the residue of miles of jolting drafts. He did not offer a hand. He shifted half a step and opened the gate wider so she would not scrape the hinge. The yard was clean down a bone. Hitch post. 2 flat mounds where old manure piles had sunk under weather. Low shed with a sag across patchy, fresh shingles. Far off his thin rye showed a dull yellow band, left uncut after an early hard rain last week. Iron and wet dust smell. In the roll of his shoulder, a buried tug of damp season pain, an old bullet line under the scapula. He adjusted the angle when he lifted a bucket. He did not dwell on it. Habit simply shifted weight. She took it all in with short looks. Her eyes paused on the vacant part of the yard where a woman's frame loom might have stood if a wife still lived here. He registered the pause, answered nothing. At the door he took off his hat, letting her pass inside first. A gesture of sequence, not welcome. The air carried plain notes. Bank stove ash, stored hay from the corner, lye washboard, a sack of flour tied above a mouse gnaw. Her boot gave one dry creak, then obeyed her order to fall silent. He set her trunk by the wall, taking time, not dissolving a foreign object too fast in his muted order. The trunk smelled of a far port, salt, machine oil, cheap starch. She kept her coat on until he hung his. Then she unhooked the top closures. The front dropped in straight planes, showing a dark, wrinkled underskirt. The burn flashed again as she eased the collar open. He went to the stove, laid kindling, lit it with a thin sliver, slid the damper half, guarding the small stack of wood from fast waste. Heat climbed the room, hesitated on the metal bed frame edge. Behind it the empty hook where a scarf had once hung. He did not look. Neither did she. He put a tin cup down, filled it with warm, not boiling, water, set a dry slice of bread, a pale flake of hard cheese, a strip of cured meat. Words would add nothing. She sat not opposite him, but angled, so their eyes would not align. She ate in small cuts, with pauses, as if testing the stomach. When at last she lifted her head, the look was not grateful. Assessing. She turned the burn down and covered it with her other hand. In a level voice, no rise for question, she formed plain words about the night. He dipped his chin once. No promise beyond that. Cold spread a sheet blur over the pane. He pulled a folded blanket from the chest of the dead, shook dust. Little dust came. He had done this more than once, though the gesture still lived. He laid the blanket on the far edge of his bed, readying himself for the bench by the stove. She noticed. A small motion at the throat, as if she meant to protest, then sealed the mouth, unwilling to stamp herself here with a spoken claim. He sat on the bench, checked the hook, finger along iron, leaving a film line of moisture, assuring it was bare. Night stretched heavy, no rain, but the roof bled rare drops through an old seam onto a clay pan. Each drop space-time. Her shoulders twitched once at the first drip, a reflex release of some memory. He did not stare. He slid a small clay scoop under the drip to make the sound even, not intermittent. Regularity is easier to bear. He spread boards for mending the seed box, fingers moving with idle, empty precision. She unhooked her boots and set them paired, laces folded back without a sound, as though reading his reluctance to have the room stirred. Later he heard her breath alter, deeper yet not sleep. He stayed up, listening to the wind, recalling the broker paper, hard-working, sound, skilled at sewing, 27. His hand had paused at the age, late in the trade of arranged brides. Now he saw the delay in her motions born of rail soot and factory rhythm, muscles tuned to repeat, not harvest. Foreign to these acres, yet useful, a seam endures where a wrist knows measured fatigue. He reached for a pine strip, pared a wrought edge with a knife, casting each curl into a straight line. This was a way to meet silence without drowning it. Outside, old corral rails gave tiny settles. The horse made no fuss. It had already accepted the new presence like weather. He closed his eyes for 40 heartbeats, not longer, and opened them under her gaze. She was not asleep, tracking his breathing to be sure it was even. He drew an old coat toward the bench and covered himself without noise. The stove fell to a red seam. Wet cold pushed out of the corners. His shoulder answered with a thin pull. He kept still. Before the narrow half-sleep took him, he marked how she turned toward the wall, but left her palm open on the blanket edge, unguarded, the posture of a person choosing not to flee this one night, counting it safe once. He did not want the story of that glossy pale scar, yet his glance returned like a finger to a map landmark. He forced it away, reaching a small box on a shelf. Inside, needles bound with his dead wife's thread. He set one needle by her folded skirt. No explanation. She saw, drew the box closer with the care of someone promising silence as currency. A draft rattled the shutter off one hinge. He rose, wedged a sliver to still it. On the floor, her boots stood spaced by exactly a palm width from the wall. He filed the precision, an attempt to fit without friction. That solves little, yet it speaks of habit. Habits are slow to break and give prediction. Beyond the yard, the road ran empty toward the settlement, where someone might ask about the letter, the legality of interception. He played the talk through and shelved it. Morning would force choice. For now, action would snap a thin surface of provisional calm. Her breathing turned shallow again, not sleeping, just holding herself in the dark the way a line worker stands between whistles. Coal hour thinned to gray. He dropped 2 small sticks, one cracked, sparking. She flinched barely. Then, for the first time, she faced him, eyes on his hand at the damper. In plain tone, she stated what would happen at dawn. He would send her on. He let his eyes rest on the scarred skin at his palm, closed his fingers, drank the last of the cup to avoid sound. She continued with the same even measure and added a single clause. She asked for 1 night of warmth before the road back. Not 2, not a plea to stay. 1, a dry line item. He nodded again. Conditions set. Before the window lightened, he caught her hand drift a fraction nearer the edge, as if testing the nearness of support. He did not move, only slowed one inhale, leaving her the unbroken quiet, their first shared thing. A small gesture fixed her brief courage without speech. Near first pale, he heard the absence of her small, restless shifts. She had fallen into a thin sleep at last. He stood, settled embers, opened and closed the damper so the new burn would creep rather than roar and wrench her awake. Outside, a faint traveler wind teased past. Empty, no threat yet. He checked the door beam. An old split had crept deeper. Work for tomorrow. He sat back, listening. The horse stepped once in the stall. No hens now. A fox had taken the last 2 in winter. Their missing rustle thickened the tone of quiet. Only a stranger's breath in his house. He accepted it as a fact, not a violation, and let a narrow band of rest take him, enough to meet her request in daylight and measure how many days his order could absorb a new presence without buckling. Gray seeped along the pane before sound. He was up first. She woke by stilling, not by motion. His nod was a ledger mark accepting the one-night promise paid. Outside the yard held a crusted chill. He led the horse to the rail, steam faint off flank. She stepped out carrying her hat now worn. The burn turned inward from cold air, hands folded under elbows to steal heat. He pointed once toward the pump. She read it, set shoulder to handle, worked a clean, even stroke. Factory timing made the rhythm waste nothing. He poured a thread into a shallow pan, warmed it over low coals, slid it to her without looking. She washed wrists, face, dabbed the burn dry with inside him, no fuss. Inside she found the needle he had left and set his dead wife's thread through its eye the first try in thin morning light. She did not ask what to mend. She chose. Her fingers found a torn feed sack side seam. 2 minutes of straight tight, running stitch closed a fray he had knotted crude last fall. She clipped tail with a quick bite of teeth and smoothed the cloth flat. Breakfast was the same plain set. She ate to fuel, not to savor. Afterwards, she stood a moment with hand pressed flat to table grain, as if learning its low warps to work around. When she lifted it, a perfect rectangle of faint warmth remained, then faded. He checked the skyline. Low broken haze. The neighbor's far fence post showed like dark teeth. A rider there would see a second shape on his place. Morning spread thin light over mud that held hoof prints from the rider who had stood in his stirrups. The mark of that pause printed deeper than the rest. He shoveled a shallow trench to drain a pooling strip beside the shed. She gathered broken stalks, laid them crosswise to slow washout. Work moved between them like measured breathing. She asked for nothing else. Instead, she filled absence with function. His shirt cuffs lost fray. The hinge whose pin had begun to score iron now glided because she lifted it free, rubbed tallow, set it down aligned. He watched the way she tested motion after each small mend. A single repetition only, trusting the fix. A different school than men who rattle success to hear it ring. The letter stub in his tin, folded with the neighbor's name, gained weight in thought simply by not being burned. Fire would erase proof of intercept, keeping it preserved hinge for later accusation. He left it, the risk balanced against her single night that no longer looked singular. She had lit the fire at dawn now, twice, and fed it with just enough. He felt his pattern rewriting itself cell by cell and stood guard over that quiet change. When the rain finally came, it did not lash. It fell in thin, upright lines that stitched yard dust shut. Roof seam drips increased. She moved the scoop before first drop landed. She had learned the sound of forming drip. He took an awl, bored a weep hole in the sagging roof board, watched brown water thread down and clear. She held a pan beneath until flow steadied, then wedged a splinter to keep the channel open. Her sleeves darkened, cloth shaping to forearms, the burned stripe blanching further under cool. Toward noon, a wagon hove slow along the distant ridge line, canvas bowed inward by wind. 2 silhouettes. He did not tense until it angled toward the neighbor's yard, not his. Relief carried no outward sign. She stood, saw his stillness hold, understood the non-arrival, returned to the loom brace, planing softness away. That reading of negative action told him more about her than questions would. By late day, the road had taken boot suction. He would not center in that. Claim of humane delay could frame the pause. Night would freeze only a thin crust. Morning travel would still mire. He let the logic settle, aware of how quickly necessity can be drafted to hide willing choice. She laid 3 measured lines of chalk, scraped from a wall seam, on the floor where the loom uprights would stand if restored. He supplied a 4th where her internal measure had drifted by half a finger. She corrected without defense. Small corrections, accepted quietly, are a binding fiber. He felt one catch somewhere inside the rib ache that seldom fully slept. At dusk, the neighbor himself rode the fence boundary, coat collar lifted, hat brim low. His horse tossed once, receiving the rain check. He did not look directly toward their house, that deliberate non-look of a man already suspicious. He dismounted at his corner post, stooped, examined wire twist, remounted. A test of presence. She remained inside, a shadow line away from the window, so that any glance would read single-figure movement only. He stood plainly in the doorway, body in answer to an unvoiced. The neighbor raised 2 fingers in a half salute without cheer and moved off. Mud flung slow arcs. Only when distance reabsorbed him did the line of her shoulder ease. He closed the door and set the bar. Not a lock against her, but against claim. Bar down, witness chosen. After dark, she laid out the mended sacks, stacked by capacity, smallest to largest. He noted she had patched one with cloth cut from inside him, so the exterior showed no orphan square. That cost her warmth margin. He took the bucket, filled it from the outside barrel, set it by stove earlier than usual so the chill would lift before dawn. That compensatory act balanced ledger in a form both could read without a syllable. The burn mark took on a faint rose edge as blood returned with room heat. She untied the throat strip a little more and coughed dryness out once. Factory air leaving slowly. He stirred beans and counted the exact 3 bubbles that marked the point before boil, closing lid, sliding pot aside. She watched, then later mirrored the placement when shifting it back. Copy here was intent to integrate, not to flatter. He sat sharpening the scythe blade, though cutting season had passed. Edge maintenance in off months eases the next push. She, seeing the motion pattern, set herself to combing out old harness threads with a bent nail, teasing fiber free to spin twine for tying shoots. Work that store's time. Wind changed. He smelled faint, acrid cold distant. Settlement stove shift. With it came a decision pressure. If he meant to send her, he would need to arrange transfer after thaw or risk her stuck between claims. Keeping her meant feeding another mouth across briefer winter stores and waiting his quiet routine with shared timing. Gain, skill, presence, a reoccupied hook on the wall perhaps, though he would not name that inward. She rose, approached the open door frame, and with thumb pushed a small splinter deeper where he had wedged the shutter earlier, securing it. An adopted repair is a form of asking. He answered by pulling the unused second cup from the shelf and setting it out for morning. Not his dead wife's. A plain spare bought once for a hired hand who never came back. Neutral. Later, when stove glow fell to low ember, she did not settle on the bed edge. Instead, she swept her palm across the weave once, measuring slackness, then lay crosswise to leave portion clear, a compromise design. He folded the coat double, laying it over his bench space, feeling the old wound settle into its groove, not flaring. Rain eased. Near midnight hoof thuds muffled by mud came and stopped beyond his fence. Breath of a horse. He lifted, moved to the door silent, listened. No rider called. After a long interval the hoof sounds withdrew. A stray loose stock or a scout hand. She had not stirred. Her body had learned this region of silence. Her exhaustion finally weighted her past light alarms. Before dawn cold thinned the air to a wire. He rose, found her already sitting, feet on the floor, hands wrapped, burn pale. She spoke 3 words only, naming loom, time, cloth. A shape of intent, build, earn, remain until exchange equal. He answered with one slow exhale, then nodded toward the brace and the chalk marks, granting unnamed leave. Outside frost hair traced, each old nail head. He felt inside the pocket where the letter stub still rode. It stayed. Fire unlit. Decision deferred is decision underway. Mid-morning brought a boy on a sorrel, coat too large, sent from a store with salt wrapped in paper and a question loose in his eyes. He let the boy see only himself. The boy asked if the neighbor's order had passed this way by mistake. A male bride laid off the stage. The word bride hung like a tack in air. He answered plain that no passenger bound for another man's gate had lodged here, only freight misrouted which he had redirected. Not a lie as spoken. Freight can be flesh and border usage. That satisfied surface. She had stood in shadow angled, so her outline read like store tool. After the boy left, she set the splinter pushed earlier a fraction deeper again, sealing joint further as if to keep her own decision from leaking. He noted, but gave no sign. That small test made her mouth tighten at one corner, reading that the path inward was not blocked. An hour later, a thin bleat carried from the far rail corner. A half-grown ewe from a wandering band had caught a hind leg between 2 shifted slats, flesh beginning to swell dark. He went, set knee, pried, freed it. The animal kicked weak, then still. She held its head calm, fingers under jaw, easing panic. He slit the strip of hide at the pressure line to clear blood back in, a simple farm cut. She did not flinch. Shared practical cruelty to spare longer harm is a bonding language. The cloud bank broke late, letting spears of light enter through roof gaps and stripe her forearms with pale bands. In that segmented light, the burn became only one more stripe among others, its meaning diffused. He looked away deliberately, so that the diminishing of her mark would not reverse under notice. Near end of day, she brought him the letter tin without prompting, placed it on the table, stepped back. Act of trust or test. He opened it, touched the folded paper once, closed tin, set it back on the shelf higher than before out of idle reach. She inclined head the slightest measure, accepting a stored risk shared. He inverted an empty seed keg, setting it by loom marks. She sat, spine straight, eyes on invisible frame, posture carrying a ghost of future cloth whose warp would belong not to a factory bell, but to frost and thaw measured acre by acre ahead. Dawn laid a thin pewter band and withdrew. He woke to the faint measured scrape of her fashioning a warp rod from a straight scrap of pine he had left leaning. She tested its flex against her knee, listening for fiber crack, rejected one, kept another, set them parallel inside the chalk rectangle. Motion claimed no authority. It simply inserted itself into vacancy like water in a rut. He brought in a length of hemp twine, split it with the blunt back of a knife, twisting halves apart slow to spare strength. Set the strands in reach. She twisted them tighter, rolling between palm and thigh to make an even cord. The burn on her wrist reddened with pressure, then settled pale again. Outside, frost lifted off nail heads and small puffs as sun's line rose. He paired a mortise in the brace, hand sure despite the old shoulder pull. Each shaving fell in a narrow, glowing curve, and she swept them into a clay bowl before boot could scatter. Inventory of byproduct is winter thrift. He measured upright height. She adjusted without being told by setting a flat stone beneath 1 foot of an invisible frame to correct imagined lean. The accuracy troubled him. A mind that can project structure could also project permanence. He watched for signs of claim dressed as utility. Mid-morning, the neighbor's rider, same thin boy, returned, pretending a loose calf search. This time she stood not in shadow, but in partial light, posture plain, hands busy braiding what could pass as rope. Nothing declared, nothing hidden. The boy eyed the loom marks with no understanding. Reported back, likely only boards. He left plodding, hooves sucking at half-thaw. She set her trunk on its side, lid inward, creating a low bench. He said nothing at its repurpose. Inside he heard, earlier, the dull thud of folded garments repositioned deeper, journey-packed shape altering to stay shape. A trunk-turned bench is a hinge in intent. He let the hinge rest half open. Pushing either way, early risk splinter. Smoke from his stove rose straight, still air. Good for roof patching. He climbed, weight balanced wide to spare sagging laugh, and from above saw her below among chalk and brace lines, small, precise, sleeves rolled to mid-forearm, burn exposed without concealment now, a neutral fact. He tarred the wheat point with saved pitch warmed over coals. She held ladder steady with both hands, fingers whitening, then relaxing as he descended. Silent coordination. It settled in him like a peg tapped home. At noon she produced from her trunk 3 small wrapped packets. Needles finer than his, a twist of dark thread, 2 bone spacers. She laid them on the table spaced evenly. He recognized quality beyond common store stock. Her former place had not been wholly poor. Choice to travel had cost more than labor debt. That sharpened the line of what he withheld from the neighbor. He slid toward her a small folded paper containing 3 coarse barley kernels of a strain he had tried and failed to coax. She took them, weighed each on her nail, then placed them back still dry. Gesture accepted, not spent yet. Seed is promise inventory. Exchanging prematurely can break a season's quiet. Afternoon brought a slant wind, dragging grain smell from the far elevator at the settlement. With it a courier cut across, carrying posted sheets. He flagged no stop here. The courier's eyes scanned door line, counted 1 mail, moved on. Her position inside the frame rectangle had shaped itself still enough to vanish into composed domestic background. Selection of where to stand is cover craft. She began warping a short test length with salvaged linen strips, hands moving with a mill's old cadence modified down to slower homestead tempo. Each pass, she tapped weft firm with a carved scrap he had given to Wedge shutter days before. Tool reassignment. That drew a brief, small curve at one corner of her mouth, less smile than recognition of resource coherence. It passed. He checked feed bins. Level would stretch lean if rationed, not starve. He could fold her consumption into winter math by thinning his own portions, cutting coffee to every third dawn. Habit of 2 cups replaced by 1 and a cup of hot plain water. He accepted the trade without self-praise. Toward dusk, he led the horse out to scrape mud from fetlocks before it froze. She followed, carrying the old harness now supple where she had waxed stitching. At his nod, she lifted a strap, buckled, checked tongue lay, ran finger under to feel for twist. Corrected a small off lay before he had to speak. Relief moved behind his ribs like heat migrating. Far across the rye stubble a dark speck detached and approached slow, the neighbor himself again. This time he did look straight at the house. He reined it out of earshot, but within claimed distance. Raised his chin. Question silent. Freight? He lifted his own chin a fraction lower, denial present steady. The neighbor's gaze shifted to the steam thread, to the roof patch, to loom marks visible through open door. Loom might read as a widow's intent, a new domestic line forming. The neighbor's mouth flattened. He turned and went. Dustless departure under damp light. She exhaled a breath she had been holding shallow. He did not remark. Instead, he fetched a small iron hook from a jar of salvage hardware and drove it into the wall at shoulder height near the frame outline. Hung there the loop of cord she had twisted. Token of semi-permanent. He watched her eyes fix on it. Not possession, but anchor. Night came down clear and hard. Stars knife bright between slow vapor rags. He tightened window chink with toe. She stirred coals, building a baking heat crown, set a flat pan, laid thin strips of dough cut from stored flour piece. Field ration transformed by shape and timing. Smell rose faint, clean. She broke one when done, handed him larger half, ate the rest in 3 small bites. Bread, first from her hand, not his, lodged in him with a weight out of proportion to flour used. Later she sat by the trunk bench, rubbing the burn scar with rendered fat in slow circles, not hiding the act. Scar care on her open site is a private trust offered. He averted eyes halfway, granting space while witnessing enough to hold the offered thread. Complicity in healing. When stove fell, she did not ask about tomorrow. She spoke only 4 words, loomed first, then rode. Order proposition. He let the silence stand, examined it for imbalance. Found none. He answered with the placement of his second cup again, without waiting for dawn. Acceptance partial, open to revision if stores or threat changed. Before sleep, she raised the blanket edge and laid a weft stick beneath so it would hold a subtle curve. Testing if he would correct. He left it. A harmless deviation allowed signals domain where greater disobedience need not grow. Outside a fox barked thin. Absence of hens made the sound pass uninvested. Wind sharpened. Temperature fell. His old wound cooled into numbness instead of ache. Weather's brief courtesy. He closed eyes, picturing the letter stub, the neighbor's narrowing looks, the loom lines firming. Decision not spoken yet, but living among objects, hook, cup, warp, bench. Foundations settle without speech. He let thought of eventual telling, if any, slide aside. Morning would need fence patch, then frame rising. He counted backward from 50 heartbeats, stopped at 7, opened eyes once more to mark her profile in coal's glow. Alert still, guarding a future not guaranteed. He slept then in a shallower, shared kind of rest. Dawn came iron clear, frost threading low weed stems and tightening mud to a thin crust that would not last past sun. He rose before she stirred coals, found her already standing, hand on the hook he had driven, thumb resting on the cord like a pulse. She released it and went to the stove, adding 3 chips spaced so each would take fire in order, nothing wasted. Outside, rye stubble glinted dull tin. Silence held a tempered expectation. He brought the letter tin down, set it on the table, left it closed. She looked once, not at the box, but at his hand withdrawing. Choice signal. He opened the door, let morning air shear through the warmer room. He stood there long enough that any watcher along the far fence could mark a single figure. Then he stepped aside, so her outline joined his in plain sight. Declaration by shared exposure. They worked frame uprights in a place before melt began. He shouldered the brace, feeling the old scar-lined tug under weight. She steadied the far foot with a palm that did not shake. Pegs went in clean, pile a hole, tap seat. By mid-morning, a short test warp stretched like pale ribs. She passed weft strips, tapped them, paused, breathed, resumed. Loom breath introduced itself to the room and was accepted. Rider, dust appeared near noon. The neighbor as expected, hat brim low, horse dark with wet from a creek crossing. He reined short of the yard, eyes taking inventory. Frame, cord on hook, 2 cups, her standing front lit without flinch. Questions lined his jaw, but did not cross. He asked if freight had been misdelivered. The word hung. He answered that nothing owed across the line would leave his gate stripped or bruised. Neutral sentence, weight pointed. The neighbor studied her burn. She did not turn it. He read the absence of plea and let the silence fail his leverage. At length he shifted rein, horse dripping, and rode off. Mudflakes spun from hooves. She did not move until the dust settled out of sight. Only then did her shoulders drop a thin level. He lifted the letter 10, opened it, removed the folded stub, held it a breath, folded once more, and fed into the stove mouth where flame was low and hungry. Paper curled, darkened, released a brief dry ink smell, and was gone. No speech. Erasure of claim. She watched ash collapse, then picked one barley kernel from the dish, pressed it into his palm, and closed his fingers. Plant together, the gesture said, or plant at all, and she will work the loom beyond one night. He opened his hand and set the kernel back beside the other 2. Whole small store entire. Promise deferred, not denied. Afternoons softened the crust. Wagon ruts took small, slick shines. She moved outside, fetched the short bench, set it near the frame, and sat winding thread with steady wrists. He patched fence where frost had heaved a post out of plumb. At each return his eyes took in micro shifts, her spine settling truer to the bench, the way her breath matched the loom tap, the trunk now fully oriented as furniture. Settlement occurs by degrees until it reads inevitable. When first long shadow crossed the floor, she stood wordless before the door beam with its deepening split and laid 2 fingers along it like a healer feeling fever length. He brought a wedge, drove it, relieved the upward stress. She dusted the loosened grit from his sleeve. 2 motions that closed one structural risk. Partnership defined and negative. Absence of failure. Evening meal lean again. He divided portions, gave himself the thinner slice without ceremony. She broke her crust in half unprompted, returned one part to his plate, not as refusal of charity, but balancing column. He left it there while he ate, and then took it last, sealing the silent arithmetic. After the meal, she rose, crossed to the empty hook that once held a scarf, touched nothing, then knelt and slid a rolled cloth from within the trunk. Inside, a narrow strip of fine woven pattern, undyed and honest. Not factory fancy, practice piece. She looped it over the new cord hook and let it hang. Her work, not the dead wife's artifact. Distinct, non-competing. House accepted the addition quietly. Night dropped quick and hard. Stars hammered cold points overhead. He banked coals. She added a flat of dough near perimeter heat so it would firm slow by morning. He moved to the doorway once more. No rider edge cut the dark. Inside, loom test cloth held its shape under faint draft. He looked at her then, not skimming past. She held gaze a beat longer than previous nights, a contract fixing. She spoke 5 words, "If storm holds, I stay." Condition framed by weather, not by his word. He answered, "Storm will hold." Statement chosen carefully, a reading of sky, not possession of her. She inclined head, almost a nod, and lay down crosswise again, leaving space. Distance now elective, not defensive. He did not lie at once. He took the barley kernels, pressed them into a small crease in the sill where cold air leaked. A reminder each dawn until planning time. Then he settled on the bench, shoulder eased by warmth radiating from new woven tension in the room. In the thinning red, he lifted the second cup, set it upright for morning. Not a symbol now, a tool placed for use. She saw and let her eyes close, palm open, scars stripe a dim pale line that no longer led thought outward to where she came from, but forward into work to be done. Wind moved along the eaves, dry, promising freeze enough to harden clay for hauling boards tomorrow. He counted heartbeats, not to fall asleep guardless, but to mark the measure of a new shared tempo. 40, 80, 120. Balanced. Before sleep sealed, he shaped the line of a statement for some later day. Not that he kept her, but that she came and built a frame and part of the roof, and stayed because cloth needed finishing and the ground needed hands. He let it rest unspoken. Words rushed ahead of deeds wrought. He closed his eyes. The house held 2 steady breaths and the soft tick of cooling iron. Outside, coyotes crossed the ridge unseen. The loom gave a small, settling creak that sounded like acceptance. He slept into it. Near midnight she woke, listened for hoof echo not coming, then lay lengthwise, abandoning the crosswise angle. He marked that hinge. Before pale she tested warp, found one slack, damp thumb, drew it even. He shaved salt, 1 pinch surplus existing only because shared thrift had made it. At clear dawn, she gave 4 words naming the engine flash that made the burn. He gave 1 naming the valley, and winter he buried his wife. Facts traded, ledger shut. Sun lifted, subsoil still iron, planting weights. She tallied warp length, picks, flaws corrected on scrapboard. Future longer than 1 night. He shelved the mare buckle memory beside the letter ash, both fuel spent, freeing sight for roof strips, deeper trench, seed soak plan. She cut a willow wand shuttle, smoothed it, handed it for him to pass back. Release sealing shared use. A stray hen drifted, pecked chaff. She let it. Later set 1 small feather with warp shavings, possible quill. By late light, a first narrow cloth strip hung 4 hand spans, plain and straight. He touched edge with a knuckle, then oiled the hinge she had saved. Night, sky har black, stars sharp. Place no longer bare bone. Hook, loom, bench, wedge, drying strip marking quiet claim. Through doorway glow, she measured thread, motion steady, not trapped, anchored. He set the bar without rechecking. Functional trust enough to sleep and plan 2 seed, rose not 1. He stood once more at threshold, feeling cold draw heat from a hinge of his scar, while inside loom rhythm kept a pulse. She lifted the first strip, tested tear by tiny pull, nodded, strength held. He imagined barter, strip for dye root, root for hen feed, feed for eggs, cycle closing round them. Wind shifted north. Thin high cloud like scrape bone meant freeze, then clear run of dry days, to set fence line and plane more slats. He placed that forecast silently between them like another tool made ready. In his mind, 1 kernel already split coat under black, her cloth binding a seam on the same morning. Shoulder, ease, thinking in twin seasons. If this quiet, hard story found you, subscribe, leave a like, and write a comment. Which silent gesture caught you, what you felt in the burn fading, in the letter turning to ash, and what frontier bond you want to hear next. Your words choose the next trail I ride.